Today we are going to do an IFR flight from Boeing Field Airport in Seattle to Scappoose Industrial in Oregon. Because I don't fly the Mooney Bravo, I'm going to keep this flight profile handy for the various stages of flight to adjust the manifold pressure and the RPMs correctly. This is the next document I need in the cockpit. It is the flight plan of the route I will fly, which is an IFR flight based on VORs and waypoints defined by VORs. As you can see, the first VOR is the SEA, only 6.3 nautical miles after takeoff. I aim to fly directly over that VOR and then head off on a 232 outbound radial away from SEA on the Victor 27 airway. Caro is the first waypoint and is defined by being at the intersection of the 232 radial from SEA and the 346 radial from the OLM VOR. I will continue over the OLM VOR on the Victor 287 airway over 4 different waypoints defined by VOR intersections towards the next big VOR, which is the BTG, or the Battleground VOR. At BTG, I will turn right on the 262 outbound radial for 11.5 nautical miles to find Scappoose Airport. There is no working VOR at Scappoose and no tower, so I might cheat a little and use the GPS near the end to find the runway. This is a chart of the flight path marked by the red line. Take off from Boeing Airfield, head on an approximate 162 heading to the SEA VOR. Go right on an outbound radial of 232 from SEA VOR to a waypoint called Caro. Caro is defined as the intersection of the 232 radial from SEA and the 346 radial from the VOR OLM. When we reach Caro, we will turn left onto a 168 heading. We will then fly directly over OLM and then head towards the Battleground BTG VOR on a 152 heading away from OLM. At some point we will switch to heading of 153 inbound to BTG. When reaching BTG, we will turn outbound on a 262 radial and head for Scappoose Airport, which is 11.5 nautical miles along that outbound radial. If you look carefully at the chart, you'll see that we're going to make use of the Victor 27 and the Victor 287 low level airways. I also have an airport diagram of the Boeing field in my cockpit so that I can taxi to the active runway. So here we are at the gate preparing the aircraft for takeoff. It's a good idea to make sure that the prop is fully forward, the fuel is on full rich, the boost pump is on, the pitot heat is on, the cowl flaps are set to halfway, the flaps are set for takeoff. Make sure the heading bug is set for the first VOR so that I don't have to look for it. Set the barometer. Make sure that your CDI needle is set to the value that it's going to be used for, which in this case is 168. The nav1 radio is set to the first VOR. The nav2 radio is set to the second VOR. The standby frequency for departure is set. The R1 is set for the DME radio. Make sure that my altitude is set to the cruising altitude. I'm going to speed up things a little bit now, and what we're going to do is we're going to call air traffic and get clearance for our IFR flight. They'll give us clearance, the departure frequency, and our squawk number for the transponder. We will acknowledge. We will then tune to ground and request permission to taxi. We'll then taxi, hold short of the runway, and then request permission for takeoff. Okay, so we're quickly going to taxi to the runway 13, take off and head for the Seattle VOR. I'm not sure what that oil truck is doing on the runway, but luckily the Mooney Bravo can climb really quickly. So as soon as I've ascertained that I have a good vertical climb rate, I will pull up the gear, and it won't be long before I pull up the flaps. I want to get flying with the autopilot as soon as possible, so I have my heading set to the approximate heading to the Seattle VOR, which is 162. But as you see, it's not completely centered. I'm still 4.8 nautical miles away. I'm watching the HSI heading selector indicator to see how far off track I am, and I'm trying to get the autopilot to center that needle by pushing the nav button on the autopilot. But you can see I'm a little bit off track at the moment, and perhaps I need to give the autopilot some help. Now I'm moving further away, so I think what I'll do is turn the yellow needle, find out what the direct heading is by centering the HSI, and then moving my heading to that value. Now I aim to keep that heading selector indicator in the middle until I pass over the SEA VOR, which is in 2.4 nautical miles time, as you can see on the DME radio. So as we cross over the VOR, what we're looking for is the heading selector indicator should move quite wildly. The to arrow should disappear and then become an away arrow, and then we'll know that we need to turn, and we know we have to turn onto the 232 radial of the SEA VOR. You can see that heading selector is moving out now, and the DME radio says that we're 0.5 nautical miles away. So I think what we will do is we'll push the heading button on the autopilot and turn onto that away radial from the SEA VOR. You can see that my to arrow has now turned into a from arrow. I'll put the HSI arrow onto a away heading of 232, so I can get onto the radial. Radials are always away from the VOR. Bearings are towards the VOR. And I'll let the autopilot find the track, and the autopilot will fly a track. It'll compensate for the wind, and I won't have to do anything. So now we are flying on the Victor 27 airway, which I know is the 232 radial from the Seattle VOR, and all I have to do is watch my DME radio, because I know that Cairo, which is my next point, is 23 odd nautical miles away. At Cairo, I'm going to latch on to the 6 radial of the OLM VOR, and I will head the reciprocal of that, which is a 166. I already have my CDI needle set to head on that heading, and when we get closer I'll watch for that needle to center. So now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to move my heading bug and get it ready for the left turn on the 166 heading, and I'm going to be watching my CDI needle. You can see that it's gradually starting to come in. When it hits the edge of that little circle in the middle of the CDI gauge, then I will click the heading button on the autopilot so that my aircraft will make a left turn and head on a 166 heading. As the CDI needle begins to centralize, I'm going to make that left turn by hitting the heading button on the autopilot. The nav button on the autopilot only works with nav 1, so I'm going to have to watch the nav 2 needle and keep it centralized myself. It appears that we've made the turn quite well and the needle is not moving at all. So hopefully we are on the track to the OLM VOR. I know from my flight plan that that is 19.4 nautical miles away, so I'm going to switch my DME radio onto R2 so I can monitor how far away I am from the VOR. Notice I have a 2 arrow on my nav 2 CDI. Notice that I've reached my cruise altitude of 7,000 feet. I've closed my cowl flaps and I've set my manifold pressure and throttle to high cruise mode, so I'm doing a speed of between 160 and 170 knots. While the autopilot is doing all the work, I just want to discuss why we chose a cruising altitude of 7,000 feet. Take a look at these little numbers next to our route, 3,000, 4,000 and 6,000. They are what we call the MEAs, the minimum en route altitude. This is the lowest height you should fly to keep your plane out of trouble. Notice the star 1900 next to the 4,000. This is the minimum obstruction clearance altitude, or MOCA. What that means is that if you fly above 1900 you won't hit anything, but if you want to communicate with the VORs you need to fly 4,000 or above. There's one other thing that we need to know, and that's the semicircular or hemispheric altitude rule, which applies in the USA, Europe and most other countries. If you're doing an IFR flight on airways and your bearing is between 0 and 179, you need to fly thousands of feet in odd numbers. That is to say 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 7,000 feet. If your bearing is between 180 and 359, you need to fly even numbers, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000. If you're doing a VFR flight and your bearing is 0 to 179, you need to fly odd numbers plus 500 feet. And if your bearing is 180 to 359, you need to fly even numbers plus 500 feet. So on this leg our MEA is 4,000 feet, but because our heading is 166 we have to fly odd numbers, which is 5,000 feet. So our minimum serviceable altitude is 5,000 feet. Notice that while I've been talking I've veered off a little bit to the left. I've been blown in that direction by the wind, and I'm going to make a compensation. So the needle is pointing a little right. I've got to head a little right to bring that needle back into the central position and stay on my radial to the Olympia VOR. The next 4 waypoints after OLM are defined by the radial 152 from OLM and by the distances that these places are from the VOR. Now we're coming up to the OLM VOR. You can see my needle is starting to move around, and you can see my DME radio is getting pretty close, and soon we will be expecting the to arrow to become a from arrow. Don't chase the needle when you're close to the VOR, just keep on the heading that you're on, and once we cross the VOR, I'll change to the 152 radial from the VOR. So any minute now I would expect that needle to pop around, and there we have an away arrow, so we know we're heading away from the VOR now. So I'm going to turn my heading bug onto a 152 radial. You can see we're turning slightly left and we're heading for the BTG VOR at this stage. We are flying in real IFR conditions, cloud all around us, can't see where we're going. Okay, now you can see that we are 4.3 nautical miles from the BTG VOR. I've tuned nav 1 to BTG frequency. I pushed the nav 1 button and verified the Morse code, and you can see my HSI needle is centered. I'm using the autopilot to track down onto the VOR, and then I'm going to turn right on a heading of 262, and I expect Scappoose Airport to be 11.5 nautical miles along that radial from BTG. So we're coming up to BTG now. I'm going to switch the nav button off on the autopilot and switch it onto heading and turn onto a heading of 262, and then I am going to center my HSI needle on the 262 away radial. It seems as though I'm way left of my track, so I'm going to head 30 degrees to the right to intersect that radial and wait until that needle centers and then get back onto my course. Waiting for the yellow needle to center on the HSI, should be any minute. As the needle centers, I'm going to move back onto my 262 heading, and then I could fly 11.5 nautical miles on the DME radio, and once I've hit 11.5 I should be directly over the airport, and then I can fly make a visual landing, because Scappoose Airport doesn't have a tower or a VOR. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the GPS to line me up with the runway, and once I've got it in sight, I'll switch the autopilot off and I'll make a visual manual landing. The visibility at the moment seems pretty good, and I'm sure we can just land on VFR rules. I'm going to speed this video up now until I've got the runway in sight, but notice that I've dropped my altitude and I'm going to soon be dropping my speed, and let's see if I can make a decent manual landing. Okay, now I have the runway in sight. I've slowed my aircraft down quite a bit by using the speed brakes, by lowering the landing gear, and by extending the flaps as much as possible. I've switched off the autopilot, and I can see that I'm a little bit left of the runway, and I'm trying to maintain some altitude, watching my speed, and moving slightly to the right to try and line up with the runway. You can see the runway is slightly diagonal to the left, and I want it to go straight out in front of me. I'm making tiny movements on my joystick just to try and get lined up. I am going to play this whole landing. If you like cutting this video now, that's absolutely fine. It was a VOR video, but I thought I'd just go in for the landing. You can see that the PAPI lights are all white. There should be 2 whites and 2 reds. But when I looked at the airport diagram, there's some quite high trees just at the front of the runway, and I'd rather come in a little higher than a little low. I'm trying to line the runway up over my attitude indicator, and I want the runway to go out at right angles, making tiny small movements on the joystick, and also trying to trim the aircraft as we go along, so I don't have to hold the joystick in any one position. You can see those trees in front of the runway. They're pretty high, so you don't want to come in too low. So I'm happy that I'm seeing 4 white lights at the moment. Before we arrive there, I want to see 2 whites and 2 reds. I'll switch my speed brakes off, and you see my speed immediately goes up a bit. I'm going to throttle back a bit and try and approach the runway at about 18 knots. And just before I land, I'll try and get as close down to 60-65 knots as I can. You can see how high those trees are, and I certainly want to avoid those. Slightly above the glide scope. I'm dropping down now. Any minute I hope to see a little red light pop up at me. There's one, but I'm putting the throttle on now because of those trees. I'd rather land long on this runway than hit one of these trees. Once you get this close, don't worry about the PAPI lights, they're not relevant anymore. Worry about your speed. Mine's slightly high because I had to accelerate over those trees, but 80 is okay. I would have preferred 70. And then as I get over the runway, I cut the throttle. I'm not dead on the center line, but I'll take that. I hope some people learned something from that. I'm pretty new at this, and constructive criticism from experienced flight simmers would be appreciated. Thank you. Goodbye.